Today's lesson is a tale of two landmarks, Notre Dame and Shuri Castle. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to talk about a couple of landmarks and their restoration. Okay, these landmarks had some problems in the past, but they were fixed up and now they are as good as new. We're talking about one in France and one in Okinawa.
Exactly right. And of course, both of them, as I'm sure many of you know from the news in the last few years, had problems with large fires that destroyed much of the structures, much of the buildings. But after a lot of hard work and careful restoration, along with a lot of sort of historical learning, they've been rebuilt and are being reopened in all their glory either now or in the near future. So for future tourists, you have a lot to look forward to. If you visit Paris, you can see Notre Dame as it's been restored, and of course Okinawa, much closer to us. Let's get into the article and find out more. A Tale of Two Landmarks, Notre Dame and Shuri Castle. Notre Dame de Paris and Shuri Castle are treasured symbols of national pride and history in France and Japan, respectively. Both structures have been badly damaged at different points in their long histories. However, subsequent reconstruction efforts have shown the resilience of the human spirit and the deep cultural meaning these landmarks hold for their nations.
大家好，第一部分介绍副词 respectively， 它的意思是分别的或是各自的。例如 Dan and Brian respectively scored 1 and 3 points in our last game. Dan 和 Brian 在我们的上一场比赛中分别得到1分和3分。或者 Doug and Don, 26 and 28 respectively, graduated from the same university. Doug 和 Don 分别是26岁和28岁，毕业于同一所大学。再来看到形容词 subsequent， 表示随后的或是接着的。例如 None of the subsequent movies were as successful as the original. 接下来的电影没有一部跟原作一样成功。或是 More details about the device were revealed in subsequent press releases. 有关该设备的更多细节会在随后的新闻稿中发布。接着看到名词 reconstruction， 它的意思是重建、改造或是重现。例如 Historians used ancient objects for a detailed reconstruction of the ancient battle. 历史学家使用古物详细重现那场古战役。也可以说 Reconstruction of the bridge took many years to complete. 这座桥的重建花了许多年才完成。继续介绍名词 resilience， 表示韧性、适应力或是复原能力。我们可以说 Although the earthquake caused great damage, the survivors showed amazing resilience. 尽管地震造成了巨大的破坏，但幸存者表现出了惊人的韧性。又或者说 This cohort of young people lack resilience and have a quickness to take offense. 这群年轻人缺乏韧性，又易受冒犯。
Okay, so these are two landmarks. A landmark, of course, is something that kind of represents a place. It's a notable building or structure or whatever. Like here in Taiwan, of course, we've got Taipei 101. That's a landmark. There's the 85 building in Kaohsiung. That's a well-known landmark down there. But we're talking about some famous landmarks in France and good old Japan. We've got Notre Dame and Shuri Castle. I think sometimes you might hear like Americans say Notre Dame or something like that. But ooh, you don't do that if you're trying to say a French name, Notre Dame, and you might even get the little sound in there, Notre Dame, to sound really French.
Yes, absolutely. And Shuri Castle, of course, being in Japan, is a little bit easier for many of us to say. But yes, Notre Dame, that's the American university with the same name. That would be okay.
That's what they call it, yeah.
You wouldn't want to say, I went to Notre Dame University in America, Notre Dame in America, and Notre Dame in Paris. So let's find out about it. It says Notre Dame in Paris de Paris, that's the full name. name of the cathedral on that little island, Ile-de-France, in the Seine River, and Shuri Castle are treasured symbols of national pride and history in France and Japan, respectively. Absolutely. And I'm sure most of you will probably be able to tell stories about visiting them, and I think a lot of people would be able to pick them out in pictures. Notre Dame in Paris, in France, and Shuri Castle, Okinawa, in Japan, respectively. And when we use that term, we're basically just kind of talking about how the things that we talked about in a list are separately and individually in that order mentioned, similar to how we might say the former and the latter or something like that. So Notre Dame, France, Shuri Castle, Japan, you see how that is laid out in the sentence.
Yeah, or I could say, for example, Scott and Tom like hamburgers and spaghetti, respectively. So that means Scott likes hamburgers and Tom likes spaghetti. You can phrase it that way in different situations. And both structures have been badly damaged at different points in their long histories. Okay, so yes, indeed, they've been around for a long time. They have suffered damage at different times or different points in their histories, which are quite long. However, subsequent reconstruction efforts have shown the resilience of the human spirit and the deep cultural meaning these landmarks hold for their nations. So we're talking about the subsequent restoration or reconstruction, rather, of these structures. Okay, subsequent just means something that happens later. So, of course, there were these disasters and there was subsequent reconstruction that occurred after the disasters. Reconstruction is just building it again.
Absolutely. And reconstruction and restoration are often used in a similar kind of way. But, of course, you would restore a painting or something that's been damaged like that. Reconstruction is more like rebuilding something. So often a structure, a building will be reconstructed, but art historians might restore an old painting or something like that. In both cases, you're kind of bringing it back to its former self, to its former glory after some damage has occurred. And these efforts, or all the work that people have put in, have shown the resilience of the human spirit. Absolutely. When we talk about resilience, it's kind of like saying you're tough. You can take some damage, you can take some knocks, you can suffer some bad luck or misfortune, but it won't make you quit, it won't break your spirit. If you have resilience in things, then, even when there's tough times, you will continue to go on, you won't give up hope, you won't quit. If you're trying to do anything difficult, definitely you'll need some resilience. And here it's the resilience of the human spirit and also the deep cultural meaning these landmarks hold for their nations. If these buildings, these structures weren't important, then they might not have put in the time and effort and, of course, spent the millions and millions of dollars that it would have cost to restore them, to bring them back to their former glory. Yet they have, and for that we are very, very thankful. Let's take a break here and listen to the second part of our article, all about Notre Dame. Completed in 1345, Notre Dame is a shining example of Gothic architecture and an emblem of both Paris and the French nation. The cathedral boasts an astonishing design that features an iconic spire and impressive stained glass rose windows. Located in the heart of Paris, the church has been the site of many historical events, such as Napoleon Bonaparte's coronation. It also served as an inspiration for Victor Hugo's famous novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
第二部分看到 boast 这个单字，它是动词，指拥有值得自豪的东西，同时也可以是吹嘘或是夸耀的意思。例如 London boasts a huge number of famous museums. 伦敦以拥有相当多知名的博物馆而自豪。再看一个例子 The school boasts an experienced staff. 这所学校以拥有经验丰富的职员而自豪。后面介绍形容词 astonishing， 指的是令人惊讶的或是惊人的。举例来说 The magician's astonishing performance left the audience in amazement. 那位魔术师令人惊讶的表演使观众啧啧称奇。又或者说 The prodigy's piano performance was truly astonishing. 这位神童的钢琴表演真的太惊人了。
Okay, so the second part of our lesson focuses on Notre Dame in Paris. Completed in 1345, Notre Dame is a shining example of Gothic architecture and an emblem of both Paris and the French nation. Okay, so we're describing this as being built in Gothic architecture, which I think is in Chinese 歌德式. I could try to describe it to you, but it's quite detailed. Just think of the Chinese 歌德式and you'll know what I mean. Gothic architecture. And of course, we're also describing the structure as an emblem of both Paris and of France. So an emblem is something that simply represents something. You might think of different emblems for different countries, like the bald eagle is like the emblem of the United States, or the maple leaf is the emblem of Canada.
Yeah, we might talk about Taipei 101 being an emblem of Taipei. You recognize it and you link that thing to a certain place. It's definitely like a symbol or even like a logo for a corporation. So this is an emblem of both Paris and the French nation, along with, of course, the Eiffel Tower. The cathedral, Notre Dame, boasts an astonishing design that features an iconic spire and impressive stained glass rose windows. Yes, indeed. The cathedral, it is a very large, important church. Cathedrals are usually part of, not always, but in this case, certainly part of the Roman Catholic Church, and they will often have an archbishop presiding over them. They're sort of like a headquarters church for a certain region of a country, and it boasts an astonishing design. Yeah, it's absolutely a beautiful building if you've ever had a chance to be there. And when we talk about a thing or a place boasting something, this is different from a person boasting. A person who is boasting is a proud person, and they are loudly talking about how great they are and kind of showing off and hoping that everyone will admire them or something like that. But of course, this is a building. It can't boast in the same way that an overly proud person could. So when we talk about a place or something like that boasting things, it basically means this is a special thing about it. It's something unique about this place, interesting about this place, possibly well-known and popular about this place as well. Taiwan boasts wonderful night markets in many of its big cities and even in some small towns. That's a special, interesting, and pleasant, nice, attractive thing about Taiwan. So it boasts an astonishing design. Something that's astonishing is amazing, impressive, incredible, really quite remarkable, quite unique, quite special, and definitely one of the things that draws people from all around the world. It's very, very special and lovely in its uniqueness.
Yep, so it's got this astonishing design, and that design features an iconic spire and impressive stained glass windows. We've got rose windows here, which we'll talk about in a second, but again, we have an astonishing design, and it features a spire. Okay, a spire is just something that sticks straight up in the air from a church. It kind of tapers toward the top there, and this one is iconic because people see this as a symbol of Paris. So something's iconic when it sort of represents something. It's similar in meaning to the word emblem, but here iconic is the adjective. Icon would be the noun.
Yeah, absolutely. The Eiffel Tower, of course, is an iconic building not too far from Notre Dame in Paris. And a spire, yeah, it's basically kind of like a tower, but it's very, very narrow, very, very tall. The top of Taipei 101, there's a spire. You can't usually go into it. It might have a ladder up the outside or the inside, a light on the top. It's not really part of the working and living space of the structure. And when that spire collapsed during the fire, that's one of the sort of terrible images from that day a few years ago when Notre Dame burned down. But it's all been restored, and of course these impressive stained glass rose windows. I believe it's called the Rose Window. I think this is on the western side of Notre Dame over the main entrance that a lot of the tourists will enter through. Very, very beautiful with this stained glass, colored glass that's sort of been arranged to create this beautiful image. And of course the light coming through the stained glass on the interior of the church is absolutely lovely. Located in the heart of Paris, the church has been the site of many historical events, such as Napoleon Bonaparte's coronation. Yes, along with many other events. Of course, completed in 1345. It's been there a very, very long time in the old part of Paris. This is sort of the medieval part of Paris when it first started, when it was a much smaller city. And it's been the site or the location of many historical events. And if you've ever seen Louis David's huge painting of Bonaparte sort of crowning himself I believe he took the crown from the archbishop's hands and placed it on his own head as if to say, I am above the church. I am the leader of this great country. I am the Emperor Napoleon. And a crowning is a coronation. This will be a religious and political ceremony when a new king or queen is anointed, sort of blessed by God and the people, and proclaimed the leader of the country. And of course, just a few years ago, we had the coronation of King Charles III in England upon the death of his mother, Elizabeth II. And there's a very large, elaborate ceremony with all the good and the great of the country there. And they go through a lot of sort of religious and political rituals in order to proclaim and crown and officially anoint the new leader of the country.
Yeah, it's for a king or a queen. Okay, you don't use it for a president like back in January, Donald Trump became the president of the United States. You would not call that a coronation. That's an inauguration. But here, it's a coronation. He gets a corona put on his head. That's the word in Latin for crown. It also served as an inspiration for Victor Hugo's famous novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Okay, so if something's an inspiration, it gives you ideas, especially if it's something in the arts. Okay, you might get inspiration from a trip to Paris, for example, to paint a painting or compose music or something like that. So yes, it served as an inspiration for this novel. I guess Victor Hugo looked at that church and said, wow, that gives me an idea for a novel about this guy who's got some handicap and all the problems he has because of it. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's finish things off now with the third part.
Tragically, a fire broke out in the cathedral in April 2019, destroying its roof and famous spire. Although no cause was confirmed, officials believe the fire was started by a cigarette or electrical fault. Following the fire, a reconstruction project was started, with the aim of preserving as much of the cathedral's original design as possible. After years of work, Notre Dame was finally reopened in 2024. Though forever changed, it still has many of its iconic features, along with newly added fire protection systems.
第三部分看到副词 tragically 表示悲剧的、悲惨的或是不幸的。例如 Tragically, hundreds of people were hurt or killed when the building collapsed. 不幸的是，该建筑物倒塌时有数百人受伤或身亡。也可以说 Tragically, the artist died before she could complete the work. 不幸的是，这位艺术家在完成作品之前就离世了。最后看到 preserve 这个单字，它是动词，表示保存，也可以是保护或是维护的意思。我们可以说 That house has been preserved just as it was a century ago. 那间屋子被保存得像100年前一样。最后一个例子 People in this village are trying to preserve their customs and traditions. 这座村庄的人民正在努力保存他们的习俗与传统。
And we are back, so let's find out exactly what happened to the cathedral to cause all of this reconstruction to be necessary. This is going back not too far in the past. I'm sure many people remember. Tragically, a fire broke out in the cathedral in April 2019. Destroying its roof and famous spire. Yes, absolutely. These news images were broadcast around the world, and it really struck people both in Paris, in France, and around the world. It's a great cultural tragedy. You know, I don't think anyone was hurt, so that's the good news. But of course, the roof of the building especially was completely destroyed. And that, of course, is tragic. Very, very sad, very, very awful, a terrible thing that we all wished hadn't happened. So when something is tragic, awful, and terrible and sad, we can, of course, use this adverb tragically. So tragically, there was a car accident and a couple of young children were hurt or something like that. Any accident is bad, but when it affects people who are innocent or things that we particularly love, it's even sadder. That's the way it feels. And this fire broke out. When a fire starts, it breaks out. The fire can then spread, but we're talking about the initial origin of the fire. The fire broke out in the cathedral, quickly spread, destroying the roof and the famous spire that, of course, came crashing down. Luckily, largely, the building, of course, is made of stone, so it's much harder to burn, but the roof was made of wood, and of course, that burned quite quickly and quite terribly.
It did survive the fire for the most part. Although no cause was confirmed, officials believe the fire was started by a cigarette or electrical fault. Okay, so they don't really know how the fire started, but they have this theory or these ideas that maybe it was started by a cigarette. Someone was smoking a cigarette and they put it out, but it was still burning and it started the fire. But it also could have been caused by some kind of electrical short in the circuit, an electrical fault. Okay, so something to do with the wiring had a problem and there were sparks and they caused a fire. That's the theory, but they don't know for sure.
Yeah, the terrible irony is they were doing restoration work on fixing the roof at that time, so they think maybe some of the workmen's equipment or one of the workmen disposed of a cigarette poorly, and that caused the fire, which then led to much more restoration work. Following the fire, a reconstruction project was started with the aim of preserving as much of the cathedral's original design as possible. So after the fire, of course, was extinguished and put out, and the firefighters had done their work, now it was time to start rebuilding, or reconstruction began. Rebuilding, reconstruction, basically the same thing, and the aim or the goal of preserving as much of the cathedral's original design as possible. I think there were some people who were saying, hey, now is our chance, we can put a metal roof in, we can change the design, modernize it in some ways, but a lot of people said, no, we should try to restore it as much as possible to the way it was, the original design. Let's not try to put solar panels on the roof or things like that. Let's keep it the wonderful old building. And that's talking about preserving things. When you preserve things, you kind of keep them the same way they are or the same way that they were in the past. And of course, with many important historical things, artworks, buildings, things like that, people feel uncomfortable by modernizing it and kind of losing those links to the past. So they try to preserve those things. They try to keep them in the same state that they were originally or for much of their life. And so that work all began. There was an interesting thing. They had help from some computer games that they had made where they had the characters in the games inside Notre Dame. So they had actually laser scanned much of the interior of the building. And so a lot of these computer game companies were able to pass on their architectural plans to the people doing the reconstruction, and that helped them save a lot of time in figuring out exactly how it should look to preserve it and restore it to its original appearance.
You know, that's pretty cool. So video games do have some use after all.
Yeah.
And after years of work, Notre Dame was finally reopened just last year in 2024. Though forever changed, it still has many of its iconic features along with newly added fire protection systems.
Good idea.
That is a good idea, of course, because they learned their lesson there. We don't want that to happen again because it is a popular tourist attraction. And, of course, most countries just love those tourist dollars. Okay, we're at the end of our explanation for today. Here comes our Chinese teacher, Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分提到，法国巴黎圣母院和日本冲绳的首里城都曾在不同时期经历过严重损坏，不过随后的重建努力展现了人类精神的韧性。文中它用到名词 reconstruction 来表达重建改造，它是来自动词 reconstruct。 那么 reconstruct 则是由字首 re 它表示 back 或是 again 表达重新再度，然后去加上 construct 组合而成的。我们来介绍 construct 它的字首字根。看到 struct S-T-R-U-C-T 这个字根，它具有 pile 或者是 build 的意思，表达堆叠或是建造。那么像 structure 这个字就是由 struct 表示建造，然后再加上名词字尾 U-R-E 而来的。那 structure 它就可以表达结构啊、构造体或是建筑物。而在 construct 这个字当中，它的字首 C-O-N 表示一起。Struct 表示建造，合在一起呢 construct 就可以表达建造啊、建构的意思。这边顺便补充几个相同字根的单字。第一个是 instruct， 那它的字首 in 表示在什么什么的上方， struct 表示建造。那同学们试着想，在执行建造工程的时候，有人在上面指挥，用这个画面也许可以联想到 instruct 它有指导、指挥的意思。第二个补充的是 obstruct，它的字首 ob 表示妨碍， struct 表示建造， 合在一起 obstruct 它就有阻止、妨碍或者是挡住、堵塞的意思。第三个补充的是 destruction， 它的字首第一表示去除或者是否定， struct 表示建造，那么 ion 是名词字尾。当我们把某个构造建筑物除掉，那就表示要把它破坏掉嘛，所以 destruction 它其实就有毁灭、破坏的意思。看到课文第二部分最后一句，它提到巴黎圣母院也是雨果的著名小说《钟楼怪人》的灵感来源，文中是用 served as an inspiration 来表达作为灵感来源。当我们用 serve as 加名词，可以表达充当、担任等等的语义，它就会跟 function as 加名词或者是act as 加上名词意思差不多。那以下介绍两种用法。第一个是当主词是事物的时候， serve as 加名词可以表达作为什么的使用啊，或者是充作、充当什么。例如 humor can serve as a tool to lighten the mood， 幽默可以作为一种缓和气氛的工具。第二个，当主词是人的时候，是表达担任什么什么的职务。例如Dave has served as the team's coach for 7 years. Dave 担任那支球队的教练已经7年了。好，那以上就是今天的重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Subsequent. Although their first plan failed, their subsequent strategy worked perfectly and achieved amazing success. Reconstruction. The reconstruction of the old bridge took several years to complete. Boast.Our hotel boasts one of the best seafood restaurants in the entire city. Astonishing. The view from the top of the mountain at sunset was astonishing and unforgettable. Iconic. The Beatles created many iconic songs that have influenced countless musicians and remain popular today. Inspiration. The city's dramatic history has served as an inspiration for many films. Tragically.Lawrence tragically lost his parents in a car accident when he was a child. Preserve. Dr. Smith and her team use special techniques to preserve ancient books.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Mike.
See you next time.